The sound of my camera bag hitting the polished parquet floor of our Murray's apartment echoed through every room like a gunshot. Ryan did not flinch. He was sitting at the kitchen island in his charcoal linen shirt, the one I had bought him for his birthday last spring in Saint Germain, calmly scrolling through his phone with the expression of a man who had rehearsed this moment so many times in his head that the actual reality of it no longer required him to perform any emotion at all. "Get your equipment out of my hallway, Mia." He did not look up from the screen. "You are cluttering the space again." My camera bag, the one containing the Hasselblad medium format body I had saved for 3 years to purchase, the one with the custom lens collection I had built piece by piece over a decade of freelance work in this city. He called it clutter. I stood in the doorway between the entrance hall and the living room and looked at my husband of 3 years, Ryan Beaumont, 36 years old, senior creative director at one of the most prestigious luxury fashion houses on Avenue Montaigne, tall, impeccably dressed, even at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, with the particular confidence of a man who has spent his entire professional life deciding what is beautiful and what is not, and who has long since extended that authority to every dimension of his personal life, including, for the past 3 years, me. "We need to talk," I said. "I am busy," when he said. "Ryan," I said, "I went to the Delacroix Gallery today." He looked up from his phone for the first time since I walked in. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not exactly. More like the expression of a chess player who has just seen the move they feared was coming and is rapidly calculating whether it is as decisive as it appears. The Delacroix Gallery, on Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, where that afternoon I had walked in for a routine meeting with the gallery's director about a potential exhibition of my landscape work, and had instead found an entire wall of photographs displayed under a name that was not mine. The photographs were mine, every single one of them. Before I tell you what happened next, let me tell you who I am. Because in this city, Paris, where everything is beautiful on the surface and the architecture hides everything beneath it, the who always matters more than the what. My name is Mia Laurent. I am 32 years old. I am a freelance photographer, and I have been one since I arrived in Paris at 22 with a secondhand Canon body, a backpack, and the specific reckless confidence of someone who has no plan but absolute clarity about the thing they love. I grew up in Lyon, the youngest daughter of a chef and a school teacher who raised 3 children on warmth and very little money, and a great deal of genuine attention to what mattered. My father, Henry, was a man who believed that the most important things in life were good bread, clear water, and telling the truth even when it was inconvenient. He ran a small restaurant for 20 years, not a grand establishment, not something that appeared in guidebooks or earned stars, but a neighborhood place that served the same 30 tables, the same honest food for 2 decades. And that was full every single night because people trusted what came out of that kitchen. My mother, Isabel, was a school teacher who spent her days helping children understand mathematics and her evenings reading everything she could find. She had a quality that I have spent years trying to capture in photographs, the ability to see precisely what was in front of her without the distortion of what she wished were true. They raised me to work honestly and to notice things clearly, and both of those habits turned out to be more useful than anything I formally studied. Photography found me, or I found it at 17, when a secondhand camera appeared at a Lion flea market, and I spent 2 weeks of babysitting earnings on it Without telling my parents, I shot everything: doorways, market stalls, the specific quality of late afternoon light on the Saône, the way the old city looked different from the heights of Fourvière at different hours of the day. I was not technically brilliant at first. I was obsessive, which is different and more important. Obsession is what carries you through the years, when the gap between what you can see and what you can make is still wide. By the time I arrived in Paris at 22, I had a portfolio that was raw and distinctive and completely uncommercial, which meant that the fashion industry, the industry that controlled most of the paying work in this city, had no immediate use for me. I spent my first 3 years shooting weddings and corporate events and the occasional editorial for small publications that paid in exposure rather than money. And I did all of it with the patient, methodical attention of someone who understands that the work you do while you are waiting to do the work you want to do is the education you cannot get any other way. Every wedding I shot taught me something about working fast under variable light. Every corporate event taught me something about managing a space I had not chosen. Every small editorial taught me something about collaborating with people who had different visual languages than mine. The work I wanted to do was landscape and architectural photography, the specific patient art of finding the human quality in spaces, the way a building holds light differently at different hours, the way a street changes character between seasons, the way the geometry of a city is simultaneously a record of every decision ever made about it and an argument about what it should become. I was not interested in fashion or celebrity or the glossy surfaces that Paris exported to the rest of the world. I was interested in the city underneath the surface, the city that existed in the early morning before the performance began, and in the late afternoon when the light did something to the stone that no set designer could replicate. I began building that body of work in my 4th year in Paris, shooting on weekends and early mornings before my paid work started. I shot in every arrondissement, in every season, in every weather condition that the city produced. I shot the Marais in snow and in August heat and in the specific blue-gray light of November. I shot the passages and the canal and the forgotten industrial spaces in the Northeast. I shot the bourgeois apartment buildings of the 16th and the public housing towers of the 18th and the medieval street patterns that survived Haussmann's renovations. Within 2 years, I had 300 images that I considered finished work. Not test shots, not explorations, but complete considered photographs that I had spent months developing to a standard I was satisfied with. I processed them with the same care that my father brought to a dish that had been ordered 1,000 times. Not mechanically, but with full attention, understanding that repetition does not reduce the importance of getting it right. They were the best work of my life. I knew it with the specific, unsentimental clarity that serious artists develop after years of honest self-assessment. These images were going to change my career. They were the thing I had been working toward since the flea market in Lyon, since the early mornings on the Saône, since I had understood for the first time that a photograph is not a record of what you saw, but an argument about why it mattered. I had shown them to exactly one person before the Delacroix Gallery changed everything. My husband. I met Ryan Beaumont at a Fashion Week party in Les Marais 3 years ago. He was attending as the creative director of Maison Beaumont, the house that bore his family name. Founded by his grandfather in the 1960s, rebuilt by his father in the 1990s, and now one of the most recognizable luxury brands in Europe, known for its rigorous aesthetic and its absolute refusal to compromise on materials. I was attending because a photographer I had assisted on the editorial shoot had brought me as a plus one, and because the party was at a gallery space, I wanted to see a converted warehouse in the Northern Marais that had been exhibiting interesting work by young artists. He found me in the back room, looking at a photograph on the wall rather than at the people around me. The photograph was by a Japanese photographer I admired enormously, a large format landscape that had the specific quality of seeming to have been taken from inside the subject rather than outside it. He stood beside me for a moment and said something about the image, something specific and technically informed about the way the photographer had used the depth of field to create a relationship between the near and far, elements that was fundamentally different from the conventional landscape approach. I turned around and we talked for 2 hours about photography and light and the specific problem of representing three-dimensional space in 2 dimensions, about the difference between documentation and interpretation, about what it means to choose a frame when every possible frame contains something you are choosing to exclude. He was charming. He was genuinely knowledgeable about visual art, not in the performative way of men who want to appear cultured, but in the specific way of someone who has spent years working in a field where the visual is the primary language. He asked good questions, and he listened to the answers. He did not talk about himself more than necessary. He seemed in the way of certain people at parties who appear unexpectedly out of the noise, like someone worth knowing. 3 months later, we were together. 8 months after that, he proposed in the apartment in the Marais that he had been renting for 4 years. A year after that, in the private garden of the Beaumont family estate in Burgundy, we were married in a small ceremony with his family and mine, and 40 people who mattered to one or both of us. My mother came to the wedding in a wheelchair because by that point she had been sick for 6 months, and the disease had progressed to the point where standing for extended periods was no longer possible. She sat at the front of the ceremony and watched with the expression she always had when she was paying very close attention to something, the specific stillness of a person who has decided to see clearly rather than to enjoy. Afterward, my father told me she had been quiet about it, not disapproving, not enthusiastic, quiet. I thought at the time that she was managing her energy, that the illness had made emotional expressiveness costly in a way it had not been before. I was wrong about what the quiet meant, but I did not understand that until much later. I want to be honest about my marriage because honesty is the only framework through which what follows makes sense. The first year was good, not perfect. Ryan was demanding and sometimes dismissive in ways I attributed to the pressure of running a major fashion house, to the weight of a family name that came with both privilege and obligation, but fundamentally good. He was interested in my work genuinely, and his connections had opened doors for me that might have taken years to find on my own. 2 editorial commissions that came directly from his introductions, a teaching position at a photography school in the 6th arrondissement that a mutual contact of his facilitated, an introduction to a gallery director who expressed genuine interest in seeing my personal work. These were real opportunities, and I was grateful for them, and the gratitude created a warmth in our marriage that I mistook for partnership. The second year was harder. Ryan's dismissals became more frequent. They were subtle at first, the kind of dismissals that you doubt yourself about, that you wonder whether you are interpreting correctly, whether your sensitivity is the problem rather than his behavior. He would look at my work on the laptop and say something like, It is technically excellent, but quite quiet, isn't it?" In a tone that made quiet sound like a failure. He would tell me that certain gallery directors he knew found landscape photography commercially difficult to place, which was true, but was deployed as a way of framing my ambitions as naive. He did not say directly that he thought I was wasting my time. He said things in the careful, considered language of a man who has learned that direct criticism creates resistance and that ambient doubt is far more effective. I want to commit these phrases to the record because I spent a long time wondering whether I had imagined them, and I did not imagine them. He said, "When are you going to do something with that photography? Something real?" He said, "You should let me make some introductions. The work you are doing now is too small for the spaces I could get you into." He said, "I just think you could be so much more if you were willing to adapt your aesthetic. Fashion photography would suit you. Your eye for composition is exactly what those campaigns need." He said once after looking at a series, "I was particularly proud of It Is Beautiful, Darling, but who is it for?" These were not the words of a man who respected what I was building. They were the words of a man who had decided that my work was a personal failing he was generously tolerating. And they worked in the way that persistent ambient doubt always works. They made me quieter about my personal work, less likely to share it, more likely to keep it in the second bedroom on the laptop with the password and the locked flat file cabinet. I thought I was protecting my work from his criticism. I did not understand until the afternoon at the Delacroix Gallery that I had been protecting it from something considerably more deliberate than criticism. By the third year, I had learned to keep my personal work entirely separate from our shared life. I processed my landscape images on a laptop in the second bedroom that Ryan never entered without being invited. I stored my finished prints in a lockable flat file cabinet where the drawers had individual locks. I maintained a private cloud archive that I believe Ryan did not have access to. That last belief was the one that mattered most, and it was the one that turned out to be wrong. The Delacroix Gallery was exhibiting a collection called Géographie Intérieure, Interior Geographies. The wall text described it as the debut series of an emerging French photographer named Etienne Marchand. The artist's statement, printed on a thick card mounted beside the first image, described Marchand as a self-taught photographer working in the tradition of the French New Wave documentary style, interested in the relationship between urban space and human memory. The statement was beautifully written, evocative, specific, the kind of language that makes a work feel inevitable once you have read it. The images showed urban landscapes with the specific patient quality that I had spent 3 years developing. The precise attention to architectural geometry, the particular handling of late afternoon light that I had spent months refining, the way I exposed for the shadows rather than the highlights, creating a depth in the darker areas of the image that most photographers sacrificed in favor of bright, open compositions. The compositional choices that I had made and refined and reconsidered over hundreds of hours of sitting in specific locations at specific times of day, waiting for the light to do the thing I needed it to do. They were my photographs, printed at exhibition scale. Some of them a meter wide, matted, and framed in the simple dark wood that I had always imagined for them, bearing a name that was not mine, priced between 800 and 4,000 euros per print. I stood in front of them for 11 minutes. I know, because I looked at my watch when I arrived at the wall and looked at it again when I was finally able to move. 11 minutes is a long time to stand in front of something, long enough to be certain, long enough to notice not just the images, but the specific processing choices I had made, the particular curve adjustment. In the third image that I had gone back and forth on for a week before arriving at the final version, the crop in the seventh that I had changed on the day before I exported the final file, the slight desaturation in the highlights of the 12th that was so subtle it would be invisible to anyone who had not made it. I had made all of it. Every decision in every image was mine, not similar to mine. I did not make a scene. I did not approach the gallery assistant who was cheerfully describing the work to a prospective buyer in the corner, gesturing at the architectural precision with the enthusiasm of someone who has just learned a new vocabulary. I walked out onto Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré into the November afternoon and stood on the pavement for a moment, looking at the street. Then I did something I had been trained by years of professional work to do in unexpected situations. I took a breath. I assessed what I knew and what I did not know. And then I acted on the assessment rather than the emotion, because acting on the emotion would have cost me information I needed. I called my oldest friend in Paris, a woman named Sophie Leclerc, who was a copyright attorney and who had known me since my second year in the city, when we had met at a dinner party in the 11th and spent 4 hours talking about photography and the law and how inadequately French intellectual property legislation protected independent creators. Sophie had become the friend I called when something required both emotional intelligence and legal precision, which in my life turned out to be more often than I expected. "Sophie," I said when she answered, "I need to ask you a legal question." "Tell me," she said. I told her. The gallery, the exhibition, the photographs under a different name. I was precise and chronological because Sophie needed information rather than filling, and I had learned to give her what she needed rather than what I was experiencing. Her response was immediate and completely precise. "Do not touch anything in the gallery. Do not confront anyone, not the gallery staff, not any artist associated with the exhibition, not Ryan. Do not post anything on social media, not a photograph, not a comment, not a suggestion that you are having any particular kind of day. Take photographs of everything in the gallery, the prints, the wall text, the price list, the promotional materials, every piece of paper you can see, and send them to me directly. Send them to my encrypted server, not to my regular email. Do you have the address?" "Yes," I said. I did. Sophie had given it to me 2 years ago for a different matter. "Then do that," she said, "and then go somewhere quiet. Do not go home yet." "Why not go home yet?" I said. "Because you need to think clearly before you have that conversation," she said, "and you will not be able to think clearly when you are in the same room as him. The conversation will happen, but it needs to happen when you have already done the first 3 things." "What are the first 3 things?" I said. "Documentation, legal representation, and a complete understanding of what you are actually dealing with," she said. "You have the documentation. You are calling legal representation. You do not yet have a complete understanding, so we start with documentation." I went back into the gallery. I used my phone to photograph every image on the wall systematically, each print straight on, then at an angle that captured both the image and the frame and the wall label. I photographed the exhibition title card in its entirety. I photographed the artist statement. I photographed the price list mounted near the gallery entrance, which showed that 3 of the 37 prints had already been sold, indicated by small red dots in the lower right corner of their frames. I photographed the gallery's promotional brochure, which described Etienne Marchand as a Paris-based photographer whose debut series had been 2 years in development. I photographed the gallery director's business card from the stack near the entrance. I photographed the back of one of the smaller prints where the frame met the wall, capturing the gallery label with the inventory number and the print edition designation. Then I walked to a cafe on the corner of Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré and Rue La Boétie. I ordered a double espresso and a glass of water. I sat at a corner table with my back to the wall where I could see the entrance and the street, and I sent everything to Sophie's encrypted server. She called back. 19 minutes later, while I was still at the cafe, while my espresso had gone from hot to warm to cold untouched. The work is yours, she said. I can see your compositional signature across every image. Not just style, which could be imitated, but the specific technical decisions that come from your processing approach. The shadow recovery in the first series is yours. The highlight treatment in the architectural set is yours. The crop ratios in the street series are yours. I recognized 3 of these images from the preview you showed me last year in March at the dinner at my apartment. The couple in the courtyard on Rue des Rosiers, the perspective study on Canal Saint-Martin, the rooftop image from the 18th. Yes, I said. Mia, how would he have accessed the files? I sat with this question. I thought carefully. I thought about the lockable flat file cabinet, which I kept locked. I thought about the laptop in the second bedroom, which had a 12-character alphanumeric password that I had never given to Ryan. I thought about the cloud archive. Last December, I said slowly, Ryan suggested I transfer my personal archive to the family cloud storage subscription. He said it would be more economical than maintaining a separate commercial plan. He set up the transfer himself because he said I would find the interface confusing. A pause on Sophie's end. A very particular kind of pause. He set up the transfer himself, she repeated. Yes, I said. And the family cloud subscription, she said. Who is the account administrator? I assumed I was, I said. He said he would set me up as the primary user. But you did not verify this independently, she said. No, I said. Another pause, this one longer. Mia. If he set up the account with himself as the administrator and you as a secondary user, he would have had unrestricted access to everything you stored in that archive from the moment you transferred the files. I looked at my cold espresso. I thought about a December evening, Ryan at the kitchen island, with his laptop doing me a favor, making the interface less confusing, taking perhaps 20 minutes to set something up that I had thanked him for. He had everything made, I said, every finished image, every working file, every processing record. From December, Sophie said. 10 months ago. The exhibition opened 3 weeks ago, I said, according to the wall text. So he had 7 months to prepare the exhibition before it opened, Sophie said, to select the images, to have prints made to establish a fictional identity to approach the gallery, and to sell 3 prints before I found out, I said. 3 prints, Sophie confirmed, the red dots. At prices between 800 and 4,000 euros, I said, and the proceeds went where, Sophie said. I do not know yet, I said. I need to ask him. Carefully, she said. I know how to take a photograph without disturbing the subject, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Before you go home, she said, I need you to tell me something. The Burgundy property, your mother's estate in Burgundy. You mentioned it once in passing months ago. Tell me what you know about it. I was surprised by the question. Why? I said. Instinct, Sophie said. Tell me. I told her what I knew. My mother's family had owned agricultural land outside Beaune for 4 generations. The property was approximately 4 hectares, a farmhouse, outbuildings, and land that had historically been used for small-scale viticulture before my grandfather converted it to mixed farming in the 1970s. My mother had inherited it from her parents, and it had been understood within the family that it would pass to her children when she died. And in her will, Sophie said, she left it to me specifically, I said, not jointly to my siblings, and me specifically to me in a private notarial document. My father told me about it after the will was read. He said my mother had made the decision about a year before she died and had not discussed it with the family beforehand. Do you know the current value? Sophie said. I assumed it was modest, I said. Agricultural land outside Beaune, an old farmhouse, perhaps 400,000 or 500,000 euros. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Has anyone contacted you about the property since your mother's death? Any inquiries? Any correspondence? Anything that might have been redirected or that you might not have received? I started to say no, and then I stopped. Sophie, I said. Ryan has access to my personal email account. He is the administrator of the family cloud service. If email is linked to the cloud account, your email would route through the same server, Sophie said. He could have access to your inbox. He suggested I switch to the family account last December, I said. When he set up the cloud storage, he said it was cleaner to have everything in one place. The cafe around me continued its ordinary afternoon business, the sound of coffee being made, the murmur of conversations, the occasional scrape of a chair on tile, all of it perfectly ordinary and completely irrelevant to the specific freezing clarity that was assembling itself in my mind. I need to call my father, I said, right now before I go home. Call him, Sophie said, and Mia press record on your voice memo before he answers. Whatever he tells you, you want a record of it. I know, I said. I will call you back. I ended the call with Sophie and called my father. I pressed the voice memo button first, as she had instructed. My father answered on the second ring with the uncomplicated warmth of a man who was always genuinely pleased when his children call. Mia, he said, I was wondering when you would call. The specific phrasing stopped me. You were expecting this, I said. Your mother always said Ryan was a man who saw value in things and wanted to own it, he said. His voice was level, careful. The voice of a man who has been holding something for a while and is choosing his moment. I think she meant you when she said it, but perhaps she meant more than one thing. I want to tell you about my mother, Isabelle Laurent, because she is the center of this story, even though she is not in it. Or rather, she is in it the way a foundation is in a building, invisible from the outside, but determining the shape of everything above it. Isabelle Laurent was 58 years old when she died. She had been a school teacher for 30 years and had spent those years teaching mathematics to children who often arrived in her classroom believing they could not understand mathematics, and who left it believing they could. This was not a minor achievement. Mathematics is the subject that breaks the most children, that makes them feel most definitively that they are on the wrong side of a line that divides people who understand things from people who do not. My mother spent 30 years dismantling that line, one student at a time, with a patience that was not soft but very precise. The patience of someone who has thought carefully about how understanding actually happens and knows that it requires specific conditions rather than simply more time. She applied the same precision to everything. She was not warm in the performative way. She did not fill rooms with brightness or excess affection. She was warm in the way of specific, sustained attention, and she gave that attention to the people and things she considered worth it with a completeness that I have never encountered anywhere else. She met Ryan twice before my wedding. The first time was at a dinner in Lyon, when Ryan and I had been together for 8 months, and I brought him home to meet my parents. My father found Ryan charming, as most people did. My mother was polite and attentive and asked Ryan questions about his work with the careful curiosity she brought to every new subject. Ryan spoke about fashion and design and the Beaumont House with the fluency of someone who had been describing these things to rooms full of people. For 20 years, my mother listened. After Ryan and I left to walk by the Saône, my mother said to my father, "He told me this 2 years later after she had died. He is performing for us." Henri, I want to understand what is underneath the performance. The second meeting was at a family Sunday lunch 6 months before the wedding. My mother was already sick by then, though the diagnosis was still weeks away. She watched Ryan at the table with the same attention she had always given to things worth watching, and afterward, she told my father something slightly different. She said he wanted to know about the property. He asked me 4 questions about it in the course of the afternoon, each framed differently. That is not casual curiosity. After that lunch, my mother revised her will. She called her notaire, a man named Bertrand, who had handled my grandparents' estate and who my mother had worked with for 15 years, and she gave him specific instructions. The Burgundy property would go to Mia directly in its entirety, not to the estate to be distributed among the children, not to Henri with the expectation that it would eventually reach the children, directly to Mia by name, in a private document that would be held by Bertrand's office until after the will was read. She did not tell my father the full details of this arrangement. She told him only that she had made some decisions about the property and that he would understand them later. She told him to remember if anything unexpected came up regarding the property after she was gone, that the document was with Bertrand. She died 14 months after the wedding. She was 57 years old. She died in the house in Lyon where I had grown up with my father beside her and all 3 of her children in the house, and she was present and clear until near the end. She did not say anything explicitly about Ryan, about the property, about any arrangement she had made. She looked at me once in the last week with the specific quality of sustained attention she had always brought to things worth watching. And she said, "You know how to see clearly. Trust that." I had thought she meant my photography. She had meant everything. I sat at the cafe table in November, Paris, and talked to my father for 42 minutes with the voice recorder running and the cold espresso in front of me and the street outside doing the late afternoon thing where the light goes from gold to gray between one moment and the next. My father told me about Edouard Renault. 3 months ago, Renault had arrived at the Burgundy property on a Tuesday morning. He was a development consultant representing a company called Haussmann Development, which was itself a subsidiary of a larger Paris-based investment group focused on luxury hospitality. He had presented himself professionally and politely had declined an offer of coffee and had explained his purpose with the directness of someone who makes many such visits and has found that clarity saves everyone's time. The luxury hospitality group for which Houseman was acting intended to develop a boutique hotel property in the Côte d'Or. They had identified the Burgundy property as meeting a specific set of criteria: the 4-hectare footprint, the existing stone structure, the water rights associated with the land, and critically, the direct access to municipal infrastructure that a newly extended service corridor had made possible 18 months earlier. The combination of these factors was unusual. The location close enough to Beaune to be commercially viable, but removed enough to offer the privacy that the luxury market required, was exactly what the group was seeking. Renault had left a preliminary valuation document. He had explained that the valuation was subject to full survey and due diligence, but that the preliminary figure represented the group's good faith estimate based on comparable transactions in the region and the specific value add of the infrastructure access. He had expressed his hope that the owner would be willing to enter into preliminary discussions. My father had explained that the property was not his to discuss. He had explained that it belonged to his daughter Mia and that any offer or inquiry would need to go through her. He had provided Renault with my name and my contact information, my personal email address, the email address that was linked to the cloud account that Ryan had administered since December of the previous year. Renault had thanked my father, said he would be in contact, and left. My father had never heard from Renault again. He had assumed I had received the contact and had chosen not to share it with him, which was not unusual. I was a private person about my finances, and my father respected that. It was not until I called him that afternoon that he understood I had received nothing. Papa Sae, I said, the preliminary valuation. What was the figure? My father went quiet for a moment. I heard the sound of him moving through the house, his footsteps on the stone floor of the kitchen, the specific creak of the second drawer of the sideboard where he kept important papers. I kept the document, Ishan, he said. I thought it seemed important. Renaud left it, so I would have a reference point for any conversations with you. What does it say? I said. The preliminary valuation, he said, reading carefully, is for 3.2 million euros, subject to full survey and due diligence. But the representative indicated this was a strong estimate and unlikely to vary significantly downward. I sat in the cafe in the November afternoon and looked at the street. 3.2 million euros for a property I had believed was a modest agricultural estate worth perhaps 500,000, for a property that Edouard Renaud had attempted to discuss with me 3 months ago using contact information that Ryan had administered and that I had never received. 3 months of silence, while I had been living in the Marais apartment with my husband, who called my camera bag clutter, while I had been teaching at the photography school and shooting weddings and working on my personal archive that was stored in a cloud account my husband controlled, while 37 of my photographs had been selected, printed, framed, and exhibited under a fictitious name at a gallery on Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré. Papa, I said, I need to tell you something. Tell me, he said. I told him about the gallery. Not the full legal dimensions, not on this call, but the fact of it. The photographs on the wall under a name that was not mine. The red dots indicating sales. My call to Sophie. My father listened without interrupting. This was characteristic of him, the same patience my mother had possessed differently expressed. He waited until I was completely finished. Then he said very quietly, your mother knew what she was doing. Yes, I said. I am beginning to understand exactly what she knew. She revised her will after the Sunday lunch he said, After he asked 4 questions about the property in one afternoon, she told me she had made some decisions. She did not tell me the details. She said I would understand later. Did she say anything else? I said. My father was quiet for a moment. She said, tell Mia to find Bertrand if she ever needs to understand what I intended. Bertrand was our notaire. He handled the will. I know Bertrand, I said. I signed the documents with him after the will was read. Then you have already found him, my father said. You just did not know yet what question to ask him. I thought about this. The notaire who had handled my mother's will, who had a private document specific to the Burgundy property that my mother had asked him to hold. Papa, I said, I need you to do something tonight. Please find Renault's contact information and call him tomorrow morning. Tell him that the property owner has been made aware of the inquiry and wishes to open direct discussions. Tell him nothing else. Do not mention Ryan. Do not explain what happened to the initial contact. I understand, my father said, and the valuation document, keep it somewhere safe, not in the usual place, somewhere Ryan would not know to look if he came to the house. A pause. You think he would come to the house? I think I do not yet know what he would do. I said honestly, I would rather be careful. All right, my father said. Papa is there. Anything else? Anything, Renault said. Anything about the development plans? Anything about the timeline? He mentioned a timeline, my father said. He said the zoning approval that made the property viable was time limited, that they needed to execute a purchase agreement before the approval window expired. He said they were working with approximately 4 months from the date of his visit. 4 months from 3 months ago, 1 month remaining. Thank you, Papa. I said. Mia, he said, and his voice had the quality it had when he was saying something important. In the understated way, he said all important things. Do what your mother taught you to do. See clearly, I said. See clearly, he said, and trust what you see. I ended the call. I looked at the cold espresso. Outside, the November afternoon had completed its transition from gold to gray, and the Paris streets were doing the evening thing where the artificial light begins to compete with the natural. And for a brief period, both are present simultaneously, creating the specific quality that photographers call the blue hour. The 20 minutes when the light is even enough to see everything without the harsh contrast of direct sun, when shadows soften and textures become more legible, and the city looks both more real and more beautiful than it does at any other time of day. I had photographed the blue hour more times than I could count. I had 6 images from the blue hour in the exhibition at the Delacroix Gallery under the name Etienne Marchand, priced at between 1,200 and 4,000 euros per print. I sat with the recording on my phone and the photographs on Sophie's server and the valuation figure in my mind. And I thought about the complete picture, not just the parts I could see, but the parts I was inferring, the way you construct the logic of an image from the elements you have chosen to include. Ryan had stolen my photographs and arranged an exhibition at a gallery where Etienne Marchand, a name he had invented, would receive the credit and the proceeds. He had intercepted the development inquiry about the Burgundy property and prevented me from knowing about a 3.2 million euro acquisition offer, presumably so that he could position himself to benefit from that transaction without my informed participation. He sat on the advisory board of a subsidiary of the company making the offer, which meant his conflict of interest was not incidental, but structural. And there was a third element that I had not yet fully examined. Ryan was the creative director of Maison Beaumont. His brother Theo sat on the same development advisory board. Theo's wife Camille had been campaigning within the Beaumont family for the past year to extend the brand into hospitality, a flagship hotel that would serve as both a business investment and a brand expression. A boutique hotel in the Côte d'Or on a 4-hectare property with an existing stone structure close to Beaune with its wine heritage and its wealthy international tourist base. The pieces were arranging themselves with the inexorable logic of a composition, finding its form the way you move elements around a frame until they arrive at the relationship that makes the whole thing inevitable. Ryan Beaumont had married me 3 years ago, knowing or having reason to suspect that my mother owned a property in Burgundy that had commercial development potential. He had spent 3 years managing my confidence, controlling my professional narrative, and accessing my digital life. He had intercepted a development inquiry that would have made me independently wealthy and positioned himself to profit from a transaction that involved assets I owned. He had stolen my work and exhibited it under a false name, using the proceeds in ways I did not yet fully understand. And he had done all of this within a family structure, the Beaumont family, that had the resources, the connections, and the legal sophistication to make it very difficult to untangle. I called Sophie. "I am coming to you," I said, "but I am going home first." "Mia, I know," I said. "I will be careful. I need to see his face when I tell him I know about the gallery. I need to see how much he understands about what I know, and I need to retrieve my archive, the physical archive, the prints, the hard drives. I am not leaving those in the apartment." "Take someone with you," Sophie said. "He would not do anything," I said. "Not physically. He is too controlled for that. And I need to be alone with him for the conversation to reveal what I needed to reveal." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "All right, but call me the moment you leave, whatever time it is." "I will," I said. I paid for the espresso I had not drunk. I put on my coat. I walked out of the cafe and through the streets toward the Marais, through the Blue Hour, past the boulangeries closing for the evening, and the restaurants opening for it, past the galleries and the boutiques and the centuries-old buildings that held the light differently at each hour, as if they were demonstrating something about the relationship between time and surface. I arrived at the apartment. I picked up my camera bag from the entrance hall, where I had set it down after a shoot earlier that day. I walked into the kitchen, and now we are back where we started. Ryan set his phone face down on the kitchen island. The deliberateness of it was revealing buying himself a half second he did not appear to need, but evidently did. "The Delacroix Gallery," he repeated. His voice was perfectly level. A man who had been expecting this conversation and had prepared for it. "My work, Ryan," I said. 37 of my photographs exhibited under a name I have never heard priced for sale without my knowledge or consent. Mia. He stood up from the stool and moved to the other side of the island, placing the marble surface between us. It was a positioning choice, physical distance, as a management strategy. "I can explain this." "Please do," I said. I was surprised by how calm my voice was. I had expected the rage to arrive when I saw his face, but what I felt was something colder and more useful, the specific clarity of a photographer who has been waiting for the right light and sees it arrive. "The gallery needed a complete body of work for that exhibition space," he said. "They had a slot and no artist. I thought your work was extraordinary. I have always thought your work was extraordinary, and I knew you would never submit it yourself. You are always convinced it is not ready, that it needs more time. I made a decision that I knew you would not make for yourself. You stole my photographs, I said. I shared them, he said. The precision of the word choice told me a great deal. Shared, rather than submitted, rather than showed. He had been practicing this vocabulary. Under someone else's name, I said. He hesitated for just half a second. The gallery director is a friend. We agreed that using your name would create certain complications. Given our relationship and my position at the house, there would be questions about whether the work was truly independent, whether I had curated it or influenced it. We thought a neutral name would let the work speak for itself without those complications. I looked at him, a man who had spent 3 years telling me my work was too quiet, too small, not commercial enough, who had just explained that he had found it extraordinary enough to exhibit without my knowledge and had constructed an entire fictional identity to protect its perceived independence. How many prints have sold? I said. The hesitation this time was longer. Some failed, he said. 14, I said. I counted the red dots. He said nothing. 14 prints, I said, at prices between 800 and 4,000 euros. That is conservatively between 11 and 56,000 euros, depending on which print sold. Where is that money, Ryan? It went into a development account, he said. His voice had the quality of a man reaching for the next prepared answer. For the exhibition program. The gallery takes their commission. You are keeping my money, I said. Our money, he said immediately. The speed was telling, the automatic correction of a man who had already decided on his framing. Everything we earn within the marriage is being stop, I said. He stopped. I looked at my husband for a long moment. I thought about 3 years. I thought about, when are you going to do something with that photography? And the work you are doing now is too small, and who is it for? I thought about the cloud account he had set up for me, the email he managed the 12 months during which he had had unrestricted access to everything I had made. I thought about what my mother had said to my father after the Sunday lunch he wanted to know about the property. He asked 4 questions about it in one afternoon, each framed differently. That is not casual curiosity. I thought about a developer named Renault who had visited my father 3 months ago and left a valuation document and contact information for a property worth 3.2 million euros and whose email to me had never arrived. Ryan, I said, did you intercept a development inquiry about my mother's property in Burgundy? The silence that followed was the most informative thing I had ever witnessed, not because of what was in it, but because of what was missing. There was no immediate denial. There was no confusion. There was no the outrage of a man falsely accused. There was only calculation, the specific visible quality of a highly intelligent person running numbers in real time, assessing what I knew and how I knew it, and what the correct response to the specific information I possessed was. I do not know what you are talking about, he said. He said it 3 seconds too late. In photography, timing is everything. 3 seconds of visible calculation before a denial is not a denial. It is a confirmation that needed time to become a denial. Okay, I said. I walked to the second bedroom. I unlocked the flat file cabinet. I removed the 3 binders of printed contact sheets that represented my working archive. I took the laptop. I took the 3 external hard drives that contained my processing files and my complete photographic archive going back 8 years. What are you doing? Ryan said from the doorway. He had followed me, which told me the controlled distance of the kitchen island had been abandoned. He was off script now. Taking my things, I said. Mia, you cannot just... He stopped, recomposed, the creative director reasserting itself over the husband. Let us sit down and discuss this properly. We are adults. We are married. Whatever you think you saw at the gallery, I can explain it fully, and we can find a way forward. You are upset. That is understandable. But making decisions when you are this emotional is not... I took photographs at the gallery today, I said. I had finished filling the laptop bag, and I straightened up and looked at him. Every print, every price list, the artist statement, the promotional materials, everything. I sent them all to my attorney 30 minutes after I found them. I would suggest you call yours. He looked at me, Ryan Beaumont, who had spent 3 years deciding what was beautiful and what was not, what was worth exhibiting and what was too small, who was worth investment and who was clutter. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has just understood that the situation he believed he controlled has been outside his control for longer than he realized. I zipped the laptop bag. I picked up the binders. I walked through the entrance hall and pulled the heavy apartment door shut behind me. The November air in the Marais was cold and smelled of rain on stone. I stood on the cobblestones and called Sophie. I am outside, I said. I will have the guest room ready, she said. Are you all right? Yes, I said. I need to stop at the notaire's office tomorrow morning. Bertrand, my mother's notaire. Why? Sophie said. Because my father told me something tonight, I said. My mother left a private document with Bertrand separate from the will about the Burgundy property. She told my father to tell me to find Bertrand if I ever needed to understand what she intended. A pause. And you think the document is relevant to what Ryan has been doing? I think my mother understood what Ryan was planning, I said, long before I did. And I think she left a document with her notaire that is going to tell me something I need to know before I can see the full picture. All right, Sophie said. Come here tonight. Tomorrow morning we go to Bertrand and then to my office. And Mia, how much does Ryan know about what you know? He knows I found the gallery, I said. He knows I have documentation and a lawyer. He does not know about Renault and the property inquiry. Or rather, he knows I asked about it, which means he knows I have some information. But he does not know how much. Good, Sophie said. Keep it that way for now. I walked through the November Marais, toward the 11th past the restaurants, filling with their early dinner crowds, and the wine bars opening their doors, and the galleries closing theirs, past the street I had photographed in every light condition for 3 years. The city was doing what the city always did, being indifferent to my specific situation while being simultaneously the most beautiful argument for paying attention that I had ever encountered. I was not going to stop paying attention. I was just going to look at a larger frame than the one I had been given. Sophie Leclerc's apartment on Rue Oberkampf was warm and orderly and smelled of coffee and printer paper, which were the two constants of her professional life, and which had over 10 years of friendship become the smell of safety to me. She met me at the door with a glass of Burgundy, which might have been a coincidence and might not have, and the expression she uses when she is professionally alarmed, but personally determined to be useful rather than worried. Sit, babe, she said. I sat. She put the glass in front of me and sat across the kitchen table with her legal pad and her pen, and I told her everything in the order it had happened. The gallery, Ryan's response, my father's call, Renault's visit, the valuation figure, the 1 month window, my mother's revision of her will after the Sunday lunch, where Ryan had asked 4 questions about the property in one afternoon. Sophie filled 5 pages of notes. When I finished, she set her pen down and looked at what she had written for a long moment. All right, she said. There are 2 immediate legal tracks and a third that will take longer, but is potentially the most significant. Tell me, I said. The first track is the copyright infringement, the gallery situation. This is the clearest and most immediately actionable issue. You have irrefutable provenance. The EXIF data in your original files, the processing records in Lightroom, the raw files that predate any possible forgery, and my personal identification of 3 specific images from your preview in March. We send a formal cease and desist to the Delacroix Gallery and to Ryan tomorrow morning. The gallery will remove the work immediately. They have no interest in being implicated in a copyright dispute. The question of the sales proceeds becomes a matter of financial recovery, which we pursue through the civil courts. Is there a criminal dimension? I said. Potentially. Copyright infringement at this scale for commercial gain can be prosecuted criminally in France, but criminal proceedings are slow and uncertain, and we have more immediate tools available to us on the civil side. We start there. The second track, I said. The property, she said. Your mother left you a property currently valued at 3.2 million euros. A developer has made a preliminary offer, and the acquisition window closes in 1 month. You have not received the developer's contact because your husband, who has administrative access to your communications, intercepted it. Can I prove the interception? I said. Not directly, not yet, she said. But we do not need to prove it to act on it. You are the legal owner of the property. You call the developer directly as the owner, and you open discussions. The fact that the original contact was intercepted becomes relevant later in the divorce proceedings as evidence of financial manipulation within the marriage. For now, the priority is to secure the transaction before the window closes. 1 month, I said. 1 month shines, she confirmed, which is tight but achievable if we move immediately. I have contacts in notarial practice who handle commercial property transactions. The due diligence on a residential property with established zoning approval and a motivated institutional buyer can move quickly. And the money, I said, when the transaction closes. The property is your separate inherited asset, Sophie said. As long as the proceeds are never commingled with joint marital funds, as long as they go directly into a private account or trust in your name. Only Ryan has no claim to them in the divorce proceedings. Inherited assets are separate property under French law. The critical thing is not to let the funds touch any joint account. I nodded. And the third track, Sophie looked at her notes. Then she looked at me. The third track is the question of what Ryan knew and when he knew it. Whether he married you knowing about the property's potential value. Whether his family, the Beaumont family, was part of a plan that extended beyond the photographs. His brother Theo sits on the same advisory board as Ryan, I said. His wife Camille has been pushing for a Beaumont hotel property in Burgundy for over a year. Sophie wrote this down. If we can establish that the Beaumont family had a coordinated plan, that Ryan's marriage to you was at least partly motivated by the anticipated value of your inheritance, that the theft of your photographs was connected to the property scheme, that multiple family members were involved, then we are looking at something considerably more serious than a marital dispute. We are looking at fraud, I said. Potentially, she said. And fraud at that level, involving that kind of money, is the kind of case that attracts serious legal resources on our side as well as theirs. She put her pen down. Mia, I need to be direct with you about something. Say it, I said. The Beaumont family is very wealthy and very well connected in Paris, she said. Ryan and Theo have attorneys on retainer who have handled commercial litigation at the highest levels. If we pursue this aggressively, they will push back with everything they have. We need our documentation to be absolutely complete before we make any move that signals the full scope of what we know. I understand, I said, which means, she said, that tomorrow morning we do 3 things in this order. First, we send the cease and desist to the gallery and to Ryan. Second, you go to Bertrand's office and find out what your mother left in that private document. Third, we contact Renaud at Haussmann Development, and you introduce yourself as the owner of the Burgundy property. And then, I said, Sophie said, we wait to see what Ryan does when he understands the scale of what has changed. Because the way a person responds when they realize they have been caught tells you more about what they have done than any document. I looked at the Burgundy in my glass. My father's voice on the recording, my mother's handwriting on the will, 4 generations of a family in specific soil. Sophie, I said, do you think he married me for the property? She was quiet for a long time. I think, she said carefully, that a man with Ryan's intelligence and his family's resources who sat down at a Fashion Week party and found a woman from Lyon with a mother who owned agricultural land that had just been rezoned for commercial development, I think such a man might have made a calculation. But I said, but I also think, she said, that calculations do not always stay calculations, that people are more complicated than their worst decisions, that what he did is still what he did, regardless of how it started. I sat with this. It was the right kind of ambiguity, not the comfortable kind that lets you avoid difficult truths, but the honest kind that refuses to simplify a person into a single motive. It does not change what happens next. I said, no, Sophie said, it does not. I drank the wine. Outside, the November Paris night was doing what November Paris nights do, dense and cold and specific. The city continuing its indifferent centuries-old existence, without reference to any individual drama playing out inside its buildings. My mother had died 14 months ago. She had been a school teacher who taught children that they were capable of understanding difficult things, and she had spent the last year of her life quietly, carefully, without drama or announcement, arranging a defense for her daughter against a threat she had seen coming with the clear, patient attention she had always brought to things worth watching. She had not been able to protect my photographs. She had not known about that particular form of theft, but she had protected the thing she could protect with the tools she had available. And she had left me a path to find it. See clearly, she had said. Trust what you see. I was seeing clearly. All of it. The gallery, the property, the Beaumont family's hospitality, ambitions, the advisory board, connections, the intercepted emails, the complete frame with every element in its correct relationship to every other element. And I was beginning to understand, with the specific cold certainty that comes when a composition finally finds its form, exactly what I was going to do with the shutter. I woke at 6 the following morning in Sophie's guest room, alert and clear-headed, with the specific feeling of having processed something completely during sleep and being ready to begin. I dressed in the clothes from the previous day. I had left the apartment with my camera equipment and nothing else, which was a detail that would matter later, documented in the timeline of what happened and in what order. I made coffee in Sophie's kitchen while she slept. I sat at her kitchen table and opened my laptop and spent 90 minutes doing what I always do when I need to understand a situation completely. I documented it precisely. I organized the gallery photographs into a numbered sequence with full metadata extracted and annotated. I created a time-stamped log of every image, the EXIF data showing the date, the time, the GPS coordinates, the camera model and serial number, the lens focal length, the exposure settings. These were the fingerprints of the images embedded in the files at the moment of creation, and impossible to fabricate retroactively. They proved absolutely and irrefutably that each photograph had been made by a specific camera body at a specific location on a specific date, months or years before the fictional Etienne Marchand could have made them. I cross-referenced this with my Lightroom processing catalog, the complete development history of each image, showing every adjustment in sequence, every decision I had made, and reconsidered every version I had exported and discarded before arriving at the final file. The processing history of a photograph is as individual as a fingerprint. It records not just what was done, but the thinking behind it, the sequence of decisions, the reversals, the specific aesthetic judgments that no one could replicate without access to the original thought process. By 8 o'clock, I had a complete evidentiary package and had sent it to Sophie's server with a full index. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway at 8:15, already dressed, already carrying her legal pad. She poured coffee and looked at the index I had created. "This is immaculate, Juanete, she said. "The documentation is the easy part," I said. "I am a photographer. I keep records." At 9, she sent the cease and desist notices to the Delacroix Gallery, to Ryan's personal email address, and for completeness and for the record, to Ryan's corporate address at Maison Beaumont. At 9:47, my phone rang, a number I did not recognize. I answered. The gallery's assistant director, professional type, voiced alarmed. I was the photographer who had made the images. I had complete provenance documentation. My attorney would be in contact. All communication should be directed to Sophie Leclerc. I ended the call. "The gallery will cooperate," I told Sophie, who had been listening from the doorway. "They always do," she said. "They have no alternative." She held up her phone. "I have Edouard Renault's number. Your father found it last night and sent it to me directly as you asked. Are you ready?" I picked up my coffee cup. My camera bag was on Sophie's kitchen floor, the Hasselblad, the lenses, the decade of professional work contained in that battered canvas. My father's voice was saved on my phone. My mother's document was waiting at Bertrand's office. The Burgundy property was sitting in specific soil in the Côte d'Or, 4 hectares of it, waiting for the decision that its owner was now ready to make. "Yes," I said, "make the call." Edouard Renault answered on the 3rd ring. He had a professional voice, measured, accustomed to delivering information to people who needed to receive it clearly the first time. Sophie had put the call on speaker and set her phone on the kitchen table between us. I had my notepad open and my pen ready. "Monsieur Renault," Sophie said. My name is Sophie Leclerc. I am a copyright and property attorney calling on behalf of my client, Mia Laurent. Madame Laurent is the legal owner of the property in Burgundy that your representative approached her father about 3 months ago. She has only recently become aware of the inquiry and wishes to open direct discussions. A brief pause. Madame Laurent. His voice shifted slightly, the specific shift of a man who has been waiting for a call and is managing his relief at its arrival. I am very glad you have made contact. We were concerned when we did not hear from you. The timeline. I understand the timeline, I said. 1 month remains on the zoning approval window. Yes, he said, which is tight but workable if all parties are motivated. I am motivated, I said. I would like to understand the full scope of the proposal before we proceed. Your preliminary valuation figure, is that still current? It is, he said. We completed a secondary internal assessment last month. The figure holds 3.2 million euros subject to full survey, which we can commission immediately upon reaching a heads of terms agreement. And the development plans, I said. He described them clearly and in detail. And as he spoke, I took notes with the same precision I bring to technical photography, every specific measurement committed to the record, every timeline element noted, every condition documented. The hotel group intended to develop a boutique property of 22 rooms. The existing stone farmhouse structure would be preserved and incorporated as the primary guest building. 4 additional structures would be developed across the 4-hectare footprint, each designed to respect the agricultural landscape character of the Côte d'Or. The water rights that came with the land were essential for the property's sustainability credentials, which the Hotel brand considered commercially critical in the current market. The development timeline was 3 years from acquisition to opening. The acquisition itself, given the institutional buyer and the established zoning approval, could close in 8 to 10 weeks. 8 to 10 weeks, babe, I said. Is that realistic, given that we are only beginning discussions today? For a motivated institutional buyer working with a motivated seller who has clean title. Renault said, yes. The zoning work is already complete. The due diligence on the property itself is straightforward. The principal constraint is the legal process, which your notaire will manage. I have a notaire, I said, Bertrand Moreau, who handled my mother's estate. I know Bertrand, Renault said, with the tone of a man for whom Paris's notarial community is a small world. He is thorough and efficient. If he is available, the process can move. I will contact him today, I said. And Monsieur Renault, I would like one thing clearly understood before we proceed further. All communications regarding this property and this transaction are to go through my attorney, Sophie Leclerc, whose contact information I will provide, not through any other intermediary, not through any other family member, directly and exclusively through Madame Leclerc. A brief pause that told me Renault had been briefed about the family situation, at least partially. Of course, he said. That is entirely standard. Thank you, I said. We will be in touch today. Sophie ended the call. She looked at me across the table with the expression of a woman who is professionally composed and personally proud. 3.2 million euros, she said, in 8 to 10 weeks. In a private trust in my name exclusively, I said. With funds, never touching any joint account. Correct. She picked up her pen. I will draft the initial terms letter to Renault this afternoon. This morning we go to Bertrand Moreau's office, was in the 6th arrondissement on a street that had been the address of notaires and attorneys for 2 centuries, the kind of street where the buildings understood their function and wore it without ostentation. His practice occupied a second-floor apartment that had been converted to professional use with the minimum necessary changes, the original parquet still on the floor, the original plaster still on the walls, file cabinets standing where furniture had once stood. Bertrand himself was 68 years old, compact and precise, with the specific quality of someone who has spent 40 years handling the most intimate financial affairs of families during their most difficult moments, and has developed as a result a profound respect for discretion and a complete immunity to drama. He received us at 10 o'clock. He had been expecting my call. He said he had been expecting it since my mother's death, though he had assumed it would come sooner. Your mother was very specific about her instructions, he said. He had produced a sealed envelope from a locked drawer and set it on the desk between us without opening it. She asked me to hold this until you came to me directly, not until you called, until you came in person. She knew I would come, I said. She said you would come when you needed to understand what she had intended, he said. She said you would know when that moment was. I looked at the envelope. My mother's handwriting on the front, my name in her specific clear script, the way she had written it on school forms and birthday cards, and the letter she had sent me when I moved to Paris at 22. The letter that I had kept in the flat file cabinet, along with my archive. May I open it? I said. It is addressed to you, Bertrand said. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, and beneath it, a smaller envelope that contained a USB drive. The sheet of paper was a letter, 3 pages handwritten in my mother's precise hand that became slightly less precise toward the end as the disease progressed. I read it at Bertrand's desk while Sophie sat beside me and Bertrand sat across from us, and the 6th arrondissement went about its morning business outside the window. I will not reproduce the letter in full here because some of it was private. In the way that letters from dying mothers are private, the personal dimensions of it, the things she said about loving me and about what she hoped for my life, belong to me and not to this account. But the material dimensions of it I will describe because they matter. My mother wrote that she had become aware in the spring, before her diagnosis, that the zoning corridor in which the Burgundy property sat was being reviewed by the regional authority for potential commercial reclassification. She had learned this not through any deliberate investigation, but through a conversation at a neighbor's dinner table in Lyon, where a municipal planning official had spoken in general terms about development pressures in the Côte d'Or and the kinds of properties that were likely to become attractive to institutional investors as a result. She had not acted on this information immediately. She had thought about it over the following months and had arrived at a conclusion, the specific quiet kind of conclusion that my mother arrived at without drama or announcement. The conclusion was that if the property became significantly more valuable than its current agricultural use, suggested the people around her who wanted things would become more interested in the property, and that interest would not necessarily be in her daughter's best interests. She identified Ryan specifically. She wrote about the Sunday lunch, the 4 questions in one afternoon, each framed differently. She wrote that she had watched Ryan for the 2 occasions she had met him and had observed a man who was highly intelligent, genuinely charming, and organized, primarily around the identification and acquisition of value. She did not write that he was a bad person. She wrote that he was a person whose interests might not align with mine at critical moments, and that critical moments were precisely when legal protection mattered. She revised her will. She spoke to Bertrand. She created the private document that placed the Burgundy property directly in my name, bypassing the general estate distribution with instructions that minimize the risk of any challenge based on mental incapacity. She had undergone a formal capacity assessment at her own request, conducted by a physician Bertrand had recommended, and the assessment was notarized and attached to the document. She had done this specifically because she understood that the people most motivated to challenge her will would also be the people most likely to claim she had not been competent when she made it. Then she had written the letter and sealed it and given it to Bertrand with instructions. The USB drive contained one document, a copy of the Regional Planning Authority's rezoning notification dated 15 months before her death, classifying the property corridor as eligible for commercial development applications. She had obtained it through a Freedom of Information request and had kept it without telling anyone. It established precisely and irrefutably when the rezoning had become public knowledge, and therefore when any person with access to planning records could have known about the property's potential commercial value. 15 months before her death, approximately 8 months before Ryan and I had become engaged. I sat at Bertrand's desk and held the USB drive in my hand and looked at the window for a long moment. Your mother, Bertrand said, was one of the most methodical people I have worked with in 40 years of practice. She thought about what she was doing very carefully, and she did it very thoroughly. Yes, I said, she did. The capacity assessment, he said, is fully documented and dated. No challenge to the will on those grounds can succeed. I know, I said. Sophie put her hand briefly on my arm. Then she took the letter and the USB drive and photographed them with her phone and sent the images to her server. She looked at Bertrand. The private document placing the property in Mia's name, she said. We will need a certified copy of that for the transaction with Haussmann Development. I have it ready, Bertrand said. He opened the locked drawer again and produced a second envelope, this one bearing the official stamp of his practice. I prepared it when Mia called this morning. I assumed that was why she was coming. Sophie took it. She looked at me. I nodded. Thank you, Monsieur Bertrand, I said. Your mother would be pleased, he said, not as a platitude, as a statement of professional fact from a man who had known her for 15 years. She worked very hard to make sure you would be all right. I stood up. I put on my coat. I picked up my camera bag, which I had brought with me because I did not intend to be separated from it again. I know, I said. She always did. We walked from Bertrand's office to Sophie's in the 11th. It was a long walk across the city, 40 minutes through the 6th and the 4th and into the eastern arrondissements. And I took it at the pace of someone who is thinking rather than hurrying because I needed the thinking time and because Paris in the late morning on a clear November day is an argument for walking rather than a taxi. Sophie walked beside me and said very little, which was the quality in her I valued most, the ability to be present without requiring the presence to be conversational. I thought about the USB drive in my bag, the rezoning notification 15 months before my mother's death, 8 months before my engagement to Ryan, the specific terrible clarity of the timeline. I thought about a fashion week party 3 years ago and a man who found me in the back room of a gallery looking at a photograph on the wall. I thought about 2 hours of conversation about photography and light. I thought about a man who asked 4 questions about a property at a family lunch, each framed differently, and a woman who watched him and thought that is not casual curiosity. I thought about whether Ryan had loved me. I had spent 3 years believing he did, and the past 24 hours discovering reasons to doubt it. But Sophie had said something true the previous evening. People are more complicated than their worst decisions. I did not know the answer with certainty, and I understood that I might never know it with certainty. And I understood also that it did not change what I was going to do. The photographs on the gallery wall bore a name that was not mine. The email from Renault had never arrived in my inbox. The property in Burgundy was worth 3.2 million euros, and I was its legal owner, and the transaction window closed in 1 month. These were the facts. They did not require a complete understanding of Ryan's emotional history to act on. I thought about my mother, about a woman who had spent her life teaching children that they were capable of understanding difficult things, and who had spent her last year understanding the difficult thing in front of her and acting on the understanding with the patient, methodical thoroughness that she had always brought to things worth doing properly. She had armed me, not with drama or confrontation or the kind of weapon that requires anger to use. She had armed me with documentation, with legal protection, with the specific, durable advantage of having done the work correctly before it was needed rather than after. I walked through the Marais, my neighborhood, Ryan's neighborhood, the neighborhood where I had spent 3 years photographing the morning light on cobblestones, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not rage, though the rage was present underneath. Not grief, though that was present too. What I felt primarily was clarity, the clarity of a photographer who has finally found the frame. By the time we reached Sophie's office, 3 things had happened that I did not yet know about. The first was that the Delacroix Gallery had called Ryan. This was inevitable. The cease and desist had been received, and the gallery director, faced with a legally documented claim of copyright infringement from a party with clear provenance, had done the sensible thing and called the person who had brought them the work. The conversation, which I learned about later from the gallery director herself when she became a cooperative witness, had lasted 11 minutes. Ryan had told the director that the matter was a misunderstanding arising from a marital dispute, and that he expected it to be resolved privately within days. The director, who was an experienced professional and not a person who confused business matters with domestic ones, had told Ryan that the gallery was removing the works immediately, that all sales were being suspended pending the legal resolution, and that any proceeds currently held by the gallery were being frozen. She had been polite about it. She had been absolute. The second thing was that Ryan had called Theo. I learned this later as well from the phone records that became available during the divorce proceedings. The call lasted 22 minutes, which was long for a call between brothers who spoke daily about business matters. I do not have a transcript of that call. I know only that it preceded a series of events that told me something about what was discussed. The third thing was that Theo Beaumont called Haussmann Development. He called Renault's supervisor at the parent company, a person more senior than Renault, someone Theo had a direct professional relationship with through the advisory board. The call, according to what I pieced together later, concerned the status of the Burgundy property acquisition. Theo represented that the ownership situation was under review and suggested that the company might benefit from waiting before proceeding with the transaction. He was 18 hours too late. Renault had already spoken to me. The terms letter from Sophie was already drafted. Bertrand already had the certified property documentation ready. When I walked into Sophie's office that afternoon and she looked up from her desk with the expression that meant news had arrived while I was walking, I understood that the game had moved into a new phase. "Tell me," I said. "Two things," she said. "The gallery has suspended all sales and removed the works. Their attorney called me 30 minutes ago. They are fully cooperative and they want to resolve quickly. They are embarrassed and they are afraid of the publicity." "Good," I said. And the second, "Someone from the Beaumont family attempted to contact Houseman Development this morning," she said. "Renaud called me. He wanted to confirm that you are the sole person authorized to negotiate on behalf of the property." "What did you tell him?" I said. "I told him that you are the sole legal owner of the property and that any contact from any other party regarding this transaction should be treated as unauthorized and logged for potential legal purposes." She looked at me steadily. "Mia, they know we are moving on the property." "Of course they do," I said. "Ryan called his brother after the gallery director called him. Theo called Houseman. It is exactly what I expected them to do." "You expected this," she said. "I expected them to try to slow the transaction," I said. "That is the only lever they have left. The photographs are documented and the gallery has removed them. The property is legally mine and Bertrand has the certified documentation. The only thing they can do to protect their position is try to complicate the sale before it closes." "And their position," Sophie said carefully, "is what exactly? What do they lose if the sale closes on your terms?" And I had been thinking about this for the past 40 minutes of walking. "Ryan loses the access to the property that he has been positioning himself to exploit," I said. "Theo and Camille lose the Burgundy location for their hotel project. If that was what they were planning, they will need to find another site, which will take time and may not happen within the zoning window they were working with. And collectively, the family loses the leverage they thought they had over me." "Leverage," Sophie said. "I was supposed to be financially dependent on Ryan," I said. "A freelance photographer with unreliable income, married to the creative director of a major fashion house, living in his apartment, benefiting from his connections. If the property had been sold with Ryan positioned as an intermediary or a co-beneficiary, he would have controlled the proceeds. If the Burgundy project had become a Beaumont family hotel, Ryan's family would have profited from my mother's asset, while I received nothing directly. Instead, Sophie said, the transaction closes in your name, the money goes into a private trust, and you file for divorce as a financially independent person." "Yes," I said. Sophie looked at her legal pad. "The divorce filing," she said. "When do you want to initiate it?" "After the property transaction closes," I said. "Not before. As long as we are still married and the transaction is pending, Ryan's attorneys will argue that the proceeds are joint marital assets. Once the transaction closes into a private trust established before any divorce filing, the separation of the asset is clean and prior." Sophie nodded slowly. "That is the correct sequence," she said. "But it means spending some additional weeks in the married state while the transaction processes. I am not going back to the apartment," I said. "I will stay with you, or I will find somewhere else. The physical separation is established. I left last night. We just don't file the papers yet." "What about Ryan in the meantime?" she said. "He knows you have an attorney. He knows the gallery has removed the works. He knows you asked about the property. He is going to be planning something." "Let him plan," I said. The documentation is already made. The provenance of the photographs is already established. The property transaction is already initiated. Everything that needed to happen before he could interfere has already happened. I sat down across from her. Sophie, what can he actually do at this point? She thought about it with the precision that made her exceptional at her work. He can contest the provenance of the photographs, she said. He will argue that as your husband, he had legitimate access to them and that sharing them with the gallery was within the scope of the marital relationship. This is a bad argument legally, but he will make it. My mother's notarial capacity assessment, I said. He can challenge the will. He has no standing to challenge your mother's will, she said. He is not a beneficiary and he is not a family member by blood. The capacity assessment eliminates any challenge based on mental state. There is no ground for him to stand on there. The property transaction itself, I said. He could attempt to file an injunction claiming that the property is a joint marital asset, she said. The argument would fail. Inherited property is separate property under French law, but it could slow the transaction if a sympathetic judge granted a temporary measure. How long would a temporary measure delay things? I said. At most 3 to 4 weeks, she said, which, given your 1-month window, could be fatal to the transaction, I said. We looked at each other. How do we prevent it? I said. We file first, she said, before Ryan's attorneys have time to draft an injunction. We file a preemptive legal declaration establishing the property as your sole and separate inherited asset, supported by the will, the private notarial document, and Bertrand's certified documentation. We file it today, this afternoon, before the end of business. Can you do that? I said. I have already drafted it, she said. She held up a document. I drafted it while you were at Bertrand's. I needed to know what the private document contained before I could finalize it, which is why I waited for you to come back. I looked at the document in her hand. My attorney, who had drafted the preemptive legal filing while I was walking across Paris, who had anticipated the injunction threat before I had articulated it, who had been 2 moves ahead of a situation she had only heard about the previous evening. File it, yay, I said. She picked up her phone. 3 days passed. They were the specific kind of days that pass slowly in the experiencing and quickly in the telling days, filled with phone calls and documents and the particular bureaucratic patience of legal processes that require precise language and witnessed signatures and the correct form submitted to the correct office before the correct deadline. I filed the preemptive declaration on Tuesday afternoon. Sophie submitted the initial terms letter to Renault on Wednesday morning. Bertrand confirmed that he had contacted his own network within the Burgundy notarial community and that the property survey could be commissioned immediately upon heads of terms. On Thursday, Ryan's attorney sent a formal letter to Sophie asserting that the Burgundy property constituted a joint marital asset subject to equal division in any divorce proceedings. Sophie sent the response on Friday morning. It was 4 pages. It cited the will, the private notarial document, the capacity assessment, the preemptive declaration filed on Tuesday, and the relevant provision of French family law regarding inherited property. It concluded by noting that any injunction application on these grounds would be opposed vigorously and that the cost of unsuccessful litigation would be pursued against the opposing party. Ryan's attorney did not file an injunction. He called Sophie instead. The call lasted 34 minutes. Sophie took notes throughout and said very little. When it ended, she came to the kitchen table where I was working and sat down. His attorney wants to discuss settlement terms, she said. He wants to settle, I said, not a question. His attorney framed it as wanting to reach a fair resolution that respects both parties' interests, she said, with the dry precision she uses when describing legal euphemism. Which means Ryan understands that the injunction path is going to fail and that the divorce proceedings are going to surface, the photograph theft, and the property interception, and the email access, and that all of that is going to be very publicly damaging. What does he want? I said. His attorney did not specify today, she said. They are requesting a meeting next week to discuss terms. What do we want? I said. Sophie looked at her legal pad. Full copyright recovery, every print, the complete archive, access and accounting of all proceeds from the gallery sales with full restitution to you. Clean legal separation of all assets established prior to the marriage with the Burgundy property confirmed as your separate property. Agreed financial settlement that acknowledges the financial abuse documented in the marriage, the access to your email, the cloud account administration, the intercepted communications, and provides compensation commensurate with the documented harm. And the photographs, I said, the gallery, the exhibition, the name, civil damages for copyright infringement, Sophie said, and a formal acknowledgement of authorship, a public correction through the gallery, attributing the work to you, not to Etienne Marchand. That last part matters most, I said. I know, she said. We will make it non-negotiable. Good, I said. Schedule the meeting. In the days between the settlement conversation and the meeting, two things happened that changed the shape of the negotiation. The first was the USB drive. Sophie had sent the contents to a digital forensics specialist in Paris, a woman named Dr. Camille Renard, who specialized in the analysis of electronic evidence in civil and commercial litigation. Dr. Renard's analysis confirmed what the document itself stated. The rezoning notification was dated 15 months before my mother's death and had been publicly filed with the regional planning authority at that time. It was accessible through the authority's public records portal to anyone with knowledge of how to search planning records. But Dr. Renard found something additional in her analysis. The document had been accessed through the regional planning authority's public portal 3 times in the 18 months before my mother's death. The access logs, which the authority maintained as a matter of administrative record, showed 3 searches for the specific parcel number of the Burgundy property. The searches were conducted from 3 different IP addresses. Dr. Renard traced 2 of the addresses to commercial office networks in Paris. The third she could not trace with certainty, but the network signature was consistent with a luxury fashion house's corporate infrastructure. 3 searches before my mother died, before the will was finalized, before my engagement to Ryan. Someone had been watching the Burgundy property for at least 18 months before it became relevant to my marriage. I sat in Sophie's office and looked at Dr. Renard's report for a long time. This is not proof, Sophie said carefully. The IP address trace is not definitive. No, I said, but it is documentation. It goes in the file. Yes, she said, it goes in the file. The second thing that happened was that Camille Beaumont called me, not Ryan, not Theo, Camille Theo's wife, the one who had been pushing for a Burgundy Hotels property, the one whose ambitions had shaped the context of everything else that had happened. She called on a Thursday evening from a number I did not recognize, and I answered because I had been answering unknown numbers for the past week, and every one of them had been relevant. Mia. Her voice was carefully calibrated, not warm, not cold, positioned somewhere between sisterly concern and professional courtesy. I know this is unexpected. I wanted to speak with you directly. I am listening, I said. I wanted you to know, she said, that Theo and I were not aware of what Ryan did with your photographs. The gallery situation, we did not know. What he did was wrong, and I want to be clear that we do not support it. I let the silence sit for a moment before responding. Thank you for telling me, I said. Regarding the property, she said, the Burgundy property, I know our interest in a hotel project in that region must seem in the context of what has happened very suspicious. I want you to know that the hotel project was an independent professional initiative. It was not connected to Ryan's actions. Was the advisory board relationship connected? I said. Ryan and Theo both sit on the Haussmann Development Advisory Board, the same company that made an inquiry about the Burgundy property. A brief pause. That is a coincidence of a business relationships, she said. Paris is a small professional world. Yes, I said. It is. Another pause. Mia, I know you and Ryan I know the situation is difficult. I am not calling to defend him. I am calling because we would like, if possible, to separate the family's professional situation from Ryan's personal behavior. What he did was his decision. Theo and I would prefer not to be implicated in it. I understood what she was saying. She was drawing a line between herself and Theo on one side and Ryan on the other, and she was calling me the person whose cooperation determined whether that line held to negotiate its existence. The settlement meeting is next week, I said. If Ryan reaches an agreement that fully resolves the copyright matter and the property matter, there will be no reason for any of the wider business relationships to become part of the legal proceedings. And if he does not reach an agreement, she said, then the full documentation of everything goes into the discovery process, Elway, I said, including the advisory board relationships and the contact made to Haussmann Development 3 months ago and the search logs from the Regional Planning Authority. All of it. A very long pause. I understand, she said. I think you do, I said. Thank you for calling Camille. I ended the call. I looked at the phone for a moment, then I called Sophie. Camille Beaumont just called me, I said. She is separating herself and Theo from Ryan in advance of the settlement meeting. She wants to know that if Ryan settles cleanly, the family's wider business relationships will not be pulled into the proceedings. Sophie was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. She is applying pressure on Ryan to settle, she said. Yes, I said, because if he does not settle, the discovery process implicates the whole family, and she does not want that. Sophie said. No, I said. The Beaumont family cannot afford the publicity. The brand depends on the image of a certain kind of integrity, a detailed public record of a coordinated scheme to access a woman's inheritance through her marriage is not compatible with that image. So we have Ryan's attorney pushing from the legal side, Sophie said, and Ryan's family pushing from the personal and financial side. Yes, I said. He is going to settle, Sophie said. He is going to settle, I said. The settlement meeting was on a Wednesday morning in a conference room at Sophie's firm in the 11th. Ryan arrived with his attorney, a man named Pascal Girard, who was expensive and experienced, and who had clearly had several difficult conversations with his client in the preceding week. Ryan himself was wearing the charcoal linen shirt, not the one I had bought him, a different one, but the same color, as if he had decided on a uniform for this particular performance. I had dressed deliberately. Not the professional armor of the first days, not the sharp suit and the controlled performance. I wore something simple, dark trousers, a gray sweater, my camera bag on the shoulder, the clothes of a photographer, the clothes of the person I actually was. Ryan looked at me when he walked in. The look was brief and complicated, and I chose not to interpret it. Whatever it contained, it was not relevant to the work of the next few hours. We sat, Sophie on one side, Gerard on the other. Ryan and I across from each other with the conference table between us. Bertrand was present as well. His knowledge of the property documentation made him essential, and his presence communicated a seriousness that no amount of legal language could add. Gerard opened. He was professional and measured and presented his client's position as what it was, an attempt to limit damage rather than a negotiation from strength. Ryan had prepared a counter proposal. It was inadequate in almost every respect. I read it in silence and then set it down and looked at Gerard. The copyright matter is not negotiable, I said. Full restitution of all proceeds from the gallery sales. A formal public attribution of the work to me issued by the gallery in coordination with my attorney. A permanent injunction against Ryan or any entity he controls using my work in any form without my explicit written consent. And a financial settlement for the harm caused, the specific harm, not a general inconvenience, but the documented harm of 3 years of systematic undermining of my professional confidence and 2 years of unauthorized access to my private archive. Gerard started to say something. I continued. The property matter, I said. The Burgundy property is my sole and separate inherited asset. This is established by law, by the will, by the private notarial document, and by the preemptive declaration filed last week. There is nothing to negotiate on this point. What I am prepared to acknowledge in the interest of reaching a clean resolution is that the 3 months during which the development inquiry sat without reaching me, those 3 months came from our shared network infrastructure, and not from any deliberate action I can prove against Ryan specifically. I paused. I am prepared to treat that as an ambiguity. I am not prepared to treat the gallery situation as an ambiguity. Gerard looked at Ryan. Ryan was looking at the table. What would constitute an acceptable resolution on the gallery matter? Gerard said. I told you, I said. Full restitution, public attribution, permanent injunction, and a financial settlement that reflects the severity of the breach. The figure, Gerard said. Sophie slid a document across the table. Gerard read it. His expression did not change, but his pen stopped moving on his notepad, which told me the figure had registered. Ryan looked up from the table and read it over Gerard's shoulder. His expression did not change either, but the quality of his stillness changed, the stillness of a man absorbing something rather than the stillness of a man waiting. This is substantial, Gerard said. It is proportionate, Sophie said, to the documented harm, the documented breach, and the documented benefit received by Ryan from the unauthorized use of my client's work. Gerard and Ryan had a brief, quiet exchange. Gerard turned back to us. My client would like a short recess, he said. They stepped out. Sophie and Bertrand and I sat in the conference room and did not speak very much. Sophie made notes. Bertrand looked at his copy of the property documentation. I looked at the window, which faced east, and was catching the late morning light at the angle that told me it was approximately 11 o'clock. They were gone for 12 minutes. When they came back, Ryan's expression had changed. Not broken, Ryan was not a person who broke in visible ways, but settled in the way of something that has been resisting pressure and has stopped. Gerard sat down. He placed Ryan's counterproposal face down on the table without reference to it. He looked at Sophie. My client accepts the terms on the copyright matter, he said. Full restitution, public attribution, permanent injunction. He would like to discuss the financial settlement figure. It is not a discussion, Sophie said pleasantly. It is a number. Your client can accept it, or we proceed to litigation, in which case the number becomes larger because the costs are added to it. A pause. My client accepts, Gerard said. I looked at Ryan. He was looking at the table again, not at me. I did not look away. Ryan, I said. He looked up. The photographs, I said. The ones at the gallery. You looked at them. You chose them. You had them printed. You framed them. You placed them in that space. You saw what they were. He was very still. Did you think they were good? I said. The question was not sarcastic. It was genuine. I needed to know. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he said quietly, in the first moment of anything at approaching directness he had offered in the entire meeting, yes, they were extraordinary. They are the best photographs I have seen in 10 years of working in this industry. I sat with that. It was the most honest thing he had said to me in 3 years, and it cost him something to say it. And it did not change anything that needed to be resolved. Then you should have said so, I said, instead of the other things you said. He looked at the table. Yes, he said, I should have. Gerard cleared his throat. The professional in the room reasserting the professional. We signed the settlement documents 2 hours later, all of them, the copyright agreement, the financial settlement, the injunction, the formal acknowledgement that the photographs in the Geographies Interieurs exhibition were the work of Mia Laurent, and that the name Etienne Marchand had been used without her knowledge or consent. The last document was the one the Delacroix Gallery had agreed to publish on their website and in a formal press statement to the photography trade press. When the last signature was on the last page, Gerard collected the documents and Ryan stood up and put on his coat. He looked at me once more at the door. The divorce filing, he said. I will not contest it. Thank you, I said. He left. Gerard followed. The door closed. Sophie looked at me. Bertrand looked at me. I looked at the window, which was still catching the morning light at the angle that said 11, though 2 hours had passed since I last looked, which meant it was actually 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which meant the light had moved. And what I was seeing was different from what I thought I was seeing, which was a lesson I had learned before and was learning again. It is done, Sophie said. The first part, I said. Yes, she said. The property transaction still needs to close, but that is just work, I said. The hard part is done. The Burgundy transaction closed 6 weeks later on a clear December morning in Bertrand's office, with Renaud present and a representative from the hotel group's legal team, and Sophie beside me, and the specific formal smell of legal documents and good coffee that Bertrand's practice always contained. I signed the transfer documents. Renaud's representative signed them. Bertrand witnessed and stamped them. 3.2 million euros left the hotel group's escrow account and entered the private trust that Sophie and Bertrand had established in my name in a financial institution in Lyon that had no connection to Ryan or to any Beaumont family interest. It took approximately 40 minutes. The hotel group's representative congratulated me on a clean transaction. Renaud shook my hand and said with genuine warmth that he was very glad I had called when I did. Bertrand produced champagne, which was not his usual practice, but which he said the occasion warranted. I drove to the Burgundy property that afternoon. My father met me there. He had driven from Lyon 2 hours to be present. We stood in the courtyard of the stone farmhouse in the December afternoon. The property was as I remembered it from childhood visits, the old stone, the specific quality of the light in the cote door, the particular silence of agricultural land in winter that is different from any other kind of silence. My mother had spent summers here as a child. My grandfather had built the second outbuilding with his own hands. 4 generations of a family in specific soil. My father looked at the farmhouse for a long time without speaking. She would be pleased, he said finally, the same words Bertrand had used, a different weight. Yes, I said. She would. What happens to it now, he said. The hotel. The hotel group takes over the development, I said. I have retained a right of first refusal on any future sale and a formal acknowledgement in the development agreement that the property's agricultural heritage is preserved in the design. The stone building stays. They build around it. My father nodded. She would have liked that, he said, the stone staying. I thought about what she would have wanted, I said. I made the decision on that basis. He looked at me. You have always seen things clearly, he said, even when you were a child. You would look at something for a very long time, and then you would know exactly what it was. I learned from her, I said. And from the camera, he said. Yes, I said, and from the camera. We stayed until the light changed. In December, the light in Burgundy goes quickly. The afternoon collapses into dusk, faster than you expect, the golden hour arriving without warning and ending before you are ready. I had my camera with me. I always had my camera with me. I photographed the farmhouse in the last of the afternoon light, the stone, the courtyard, the specific angle of the winter sun on the south-facing wall. I photographed the view from the east corner of the property where the land opened up toward the wine country, and you could see the gentle geometry of the vineyard rows extending to the horizon. I photographed my father standing in the courtyard looking at the building where my mother had spent her summers as a girl. These photographs were not for sale. They were not for exhibition. They were for me, for the specific kind of record that photographs keep better than memory, the kind that holds the light of a particular afternoon and returns it to you later with the accuracy that memory cannot. I pressed the shutter when the light was right, not a moment before, not a moment after. 6 months later, Paris was doing the spring thing, the specific extraordinary spring of a city that has endured the gray weight of winter and is finally releasing it, the chestnut trees on every boulevard, going from bare to white flowering in what seems like a single week. The cafe terraces reopening with the slightly frantic joy of people who have been inside too long. I was living in the 11th in an apartment I had rented in January and furnished slowly over the following months with the things I actually wanted rather than the things that suited a shared life I had not chosen. The apartment had a north-facing window in the main room that gave excellent diffuse light throughout the day, and a smaller window in the bedroom that faced east and caught the morning in a way I found genuinely beautiful at 6 o'clock on clear days. I had put my camera bag down on the kitchen table the day I moved in, and I had not moved it since, which was the specific domestic indicator of a person who was in the right place. The Delacroix Gallery had published the formal attribution statement in February. The works exhibited in the series Géographies Intérieures displayed at the Delacroix Gallery from October to November of the previous year under the name Etienne Marchand are the original work of Paris-based photographer Mia Laurent. The gallery apologizes for the error in attribution and is proud to confirm Madame Laurent's authorship of this extraordinary series. The statement had run in 3 photography trade publications and had been picked up by 2 arts journalism sites that covered the Paris gallery scene. The response had been considerable, not viral, not sensational. The photography world is not the internet at large, but substantial within the circles that mattered. 3 gallery directors had contacted Sophie within the week of the statement. 2 of them had offers for exhibitions of the same series under my name. The third had a different proposal, a retrospective that would include the Géographie Intérieure series and the full body of work behind it. I chose the retrospective. It seemed the appropriate scale. The divorce had finalized in March. Ryan did not contest any of it, as he had said. The financial settlement from the copyright matter had been paid. The injunction was in force. The formal attribution was public record. The photographs were mine again, in every legal and practical sense, though they had always been mine. In the only sense that mattered, the one the camera records and the law eventually catches up to. I did not follow what happened to Ryan after the settlement, not because I was bitter or because I was deliberately avoiding the information. I simply found, as the months passed, that I was not particularly interested in his subsequent choices. He made decisions and lived with them. So did I. The parallel was not a connection. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Maison Beaumont had parted ways with him as creative director in the spring. The precise circumstances were described in different ways by different people, and I paid no particular attention to any of the versions. The Beaumont Family Hotel project in Burgundy had not proceeded Haussmann development. Once my transaction was complete, had no available site, and the zoning window had expired before an alternative could be identified. Camille and Theo's ambitions had required the specific property that was no longer available to them. Whether they found another path, I did not know and did not seek to find out. What I knew was what was in my own frame. On a Thursday morning in May, I was in the 6th arrondissement for a meeting with the curator, who was handling the retrospective exhibition. We spent 2 hours going through the selection, 94 images from 4 years of work, sequenced to show the development of a visual language rather than a chronology. The curator was excellent at her work. She had opinions that improved the selection, and she expressed them with the directness of someone who respects the artist enough not to defer. After the meeting, I walked. It was a habit, the post-meeting walk, the long road home through parts of the city I had photographed and parts I had not yet found the right approach to. I walked north through the 6th and into the 4th through the Marais. I had not avoided the Marais. There was no reason to avoid it. It was a neighborhood I knew better than almost any other in the city. Every rue and impasse, every courtyard and passage, every particular quality of its light at different hours. The apartment where I had lived for 3 years was on a street I walked down without difficulty. Its heavy door shut against the May morning, its parquet floor containing nothing I needed to retrieve. I had my camera with me. I walked slowly through the Marais in the spring light, looking. The specific quality of a city in its best season, the quality that rewards the sustained attention of someone who has been here through every other season and can see the difference. I photographed a courtyard off Rue des Archives where the morning light was doing something with the old stone that I had not seen before in quite this configuration. I photographed a stretch of canal in the northern Marais where the new leaves on the trees made a geometry against the water that was both entirely contemporary and entirely ancient. I photographed a woman reading on a bench near the Hotel de Ville with the spring light catching the pages of her book in a way that made the act of reading look like its own form of photographic exposure. I walked until noon. Then I went to a cafe near the 11th and ordered coffee and a tartine and sat at a corner table and looked at what I had made that morning on the back of the camera. They were good, not the finished, considered work of the Geographies Interieurs series. This was different earlier in its development, the kind of work that takes years to know whether it will become something or remain an exploration. I had learned to sit with that uncertainty. The uncertainty was not doubt. It was the space where the work lived before it was finished. My phone buzzed. Sophie. The retrospective announcement went live this morning, she said. 3 publication requests already. The Times wants an interview. I looked at the message. Then I looked out the cafe window at the Paris street in May, which was doing the specific, excessive, magnificent thing that Paris streets in May do, the chestnut blossoms, the terraces. The quality of the light on the Haussmann buildings that makes everything look both ancient and perpetually present. Tell them I will speak about the work, I typed back, not the other thing, the work only. Sophie's reply was immediate. Already said as much. They agreed. I put the phone away. I finished my coffee. I picked up my camera. Outside the city continued its indifferent, beautiful, centuries-long existence. It did not ask whether you were happy or wounded or starting over. It simply offered itself to your attention, endlessly various, endlessly the same, and waited to see whether you were capable of seeing it clearly. I had been capable of seeing it clearly for 10 years. I was more capable now than I had been when I arrived at 22 with a secondhand camera and a backpack and the reckless confidence of someone without a plan. Difficulty had added something to the clarity rather than diminishing it, the specific quality of seeing that comes from having looked at a thing in bad light as well as good, from having made mistakes and learned their specific texture, from having had someone try to take your work and having held on to it anyway. I put on my coat. I picked up my camera bag. I walked out of the cafe into the May morning. I had work to do. The retrospective opened on the first Friday of October in a gallery in the 3rd arrondissement that had the specific scale and quality of light that the work required, large enough for the images to breathe, intimate enough for them to be seen properly. 94 photographs, 4 years of work. My name on the wall in the clean black type that I had approved with the curator 3 months earlier. My father came from Lyon. Sophie came and brought 3 colleagues from her firm who had not known they cared about photography, but who stood in front of the architectural series for a long time without moving, which was the best possible response. The curator brought industry contacts. The gallery brought their list. I stood in the main room and watched people move through the work. I watched them encounter images I had made at 6 a.m. in the rain, and at noon in August heat, and at 5 in the December afternoon with the light going fast. I watched them stop and look and sometimes move closer. I watched a woman stand in front of the burgundy photograph, the one I had made in December, in the last light, the farmhouse and the courtyard, and the specific angle of the winter sun for a long time without moving. She was not someone I knew. She was simply a person who had walked into a gallery and encountered a photograph and had stopped. That was the whole point. That was always the whole point. My father appeared beside me. He had been working his way through the exhibition, slowly reading every caption, looking at each image with the thoroughness he brought to things that mattered. "The burgundy one," he said, nodding toward the woman still standing in front of it. "You made that the afternoon we were there." "Yes," I said, "the last of the light. Your mother would have liked it," he said. "She would have stood there like that woman," I said, "for a long time." "Yes," he said, "she would have." We stood together for a while in the quiet room where the light fell at the angle I had requested from the gallery's lighting designer, diffused even the same quality throughout the day, so that every image was seen in the same conditions, regardless of when you arrived. This was the thing that could be controlled, that I had always been able to control the conditions under which the work was seen, the frame, the light, the moment. Everything else, the people who moved through the frame, the ones who tried to take what was in it, the ones who stayed and looked, that was outside my control. It had always been outside my control. The camera recorded what was there, not what you wished were there, and the discipline of photography was the discipline of accepting that truth and working within it rather than against it. I had been working within it for 10 years. I had made mistakes and had things taken from me and had made more work and had kept going the way you keep going when the thing you are doing is the thing that makes you forget to eat. The way my father had told me to work before I knew I was being taught. The room filled and emptied, and the light held steady, and the photographs remained on the walls being exactly what they were. I picked up my camera, not to shoot the opening. I never shot my own openings, just to hold it. The specific grounding weight of it in my hand, the familiar coldness of the metal body in the October air. My name was on the wall. The work was on the wall. The light was right. Everything else could take care of itself.